Hi, everybody. Welcome to Arizona NORML's virtual May monthly meeting. I'm Ryan Wilson, the Arizona NORML Communications Director. And here is your host, Arizona NORML State Director, Michael Weiser.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you to everybody that's helped us pull this together for our virtual meeting for May. We have folks on Cannabis Radio that are listening to our show tonight. We've got people from Safer Arizona, and we also have Zoom attendees. So all you guys that are trying to follow along with this wonderful world of technology, yay. So this is an election year, and when it comes to cannabis, one of the most important offices in the ballot is the Maricopa County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. It's the third largest prosecuting agency in the nation, and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office literally oversees thousands of prosecution, tens of thousands for cannabis. And historically, this office has been run by some of the most notorious prosecutors in Arizona history. The later disbarred Andrew Thomas, the current Supreme Court Justice, once infamous Bill Montgomery, who called a Vietnam vet an enemy of the state because he was a medical marijuana patient. Well, this year, the people in Phoenix and Maricopa County will get to select a new lead prosecutor, possibly create a new legacy for the office. So tonight, we're going to have a special event, a candidate forum for the candidates running to be the state's busiest prosecutor. Though we've sent multiple invites to the acting attorney, Alistair Adele, who is the Republican candidate, we did not get a response on that, so we can't do anything about it. We do have the three candidates who are vying for the Democratic nomination in the primary in August. That's Julie Gunnigle, Will Knight, and Bob McWhirter. First, it is my thrill to introduce our moderator for tonight's forum. He's our chapter legal counsel, former legal counsel for National NORML, and one of America's top cannabis defense lawyers. Ladies and gentlemen, Tom Dean.
Tom, we can't hear you.
Fix that sound.
Our first technical glitch of the evening. Hopefully that won't be a problem here. Sorry about that. For anyone, I want to say first, thank you, Mike, and anyone who doesn't know Michael Weiser, I want everyone to know he's done such an outstanding job as director of our state chapter of NORML, and so thank you, Michael, sincerely, for making arrangements with the team for this event and for all of the work you do for cannabis policy reform here in Arizona. I think I can speak for everybody to say that we're very lucky to have you here at the head of NORML. I'd also like to say that thank you to Safer Arizona and cannabisradio.com, who are broadcasting this debate to their many of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. And also, of course, especially thank you to the candidates for being here. For those of you who might not know me, I'm a criminal defense attorney. I have been for over 25 years, and much of my experience here in Maricopa County, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to interrogate these candidates for the position. Well, not interrogate, I mean question these people as a head prosecutor. Obviously, we'd all like to be here in person to do this event, but as with so many other aspects of our lives right now during this pandemic, we're doing this via Zoom and other broadcast platforms, and more. But there's specific questions about the COVID-19 situation that we're going to talk about a little later. And I'd like to introduce, here's what we're doing. I'd like to get right down to it. We have all of the candidates here, as Mike said, with the exception of the person who currently occupies the office, who we can't really, I don't think, call an incumbent because she was simply appointed when Bill Montgomery left office to become a Supreme Court justice. I think we're going to touch on that a little bit later. Right. Before we get started with the questions, though, each candidate will, I want to just kind of set the ground rules, each candidate will be allowed first, before we get started, a 3-minute introductory statement that they may use however they like. At the conclusions, and we'll talk about the parameters of the round robin questions here after they're done with those introductory statement. Also, at the conclusion of all the questions today, they will have another opportunity to do a 3-minute closing remarks. And the time will be kept by Arizona NORML Chapter Secretary Mike Robinette. So I will begin in alphabetical order for your introductory statement. First, Julie Gunnigle.
All right, well, hello. I am Julie Gunnigle. If you haven't met me yet, it's so nice to see you even virtually. I was born and raised here in Arizona. I hold a degree in chemistry from NAU, and I am a Notre Dame trained attorney on my 14th year of practice. After law school, I spent part of my career prosecuting Chicago politicians when they stole public funds. And now I am running for county attorney because I remember what Arizona was like when it invested in students, in families, and in public health. When we funded public schools instead of private prisons, when we weren't a national laughingstock for poor policy decisions. And when you look across the state and see the big problems that we have to solve, whether it be cannabis policy or criminal justice reform, corruption and conflicts of interest are at the heart of it. So to cut right to the core of NORML's mission, I believe that the cannabis prohibition creates corruption. It creates corruption in our criminal justice system by creating a profit incentive in prosecution. And perhaps nowhere is that more apparent than in TASC, the private drug treatment contractor that kicks back hundreds of dollars for each person the prosecutor's office refers. It creates corruption at the Department of Health Services, which has misspent over $1 million of medical marijuana funds, while at the same time not investigating complaints or being timely with inspections. Intelligent cannabis policies have been part of my county attorney platform from the beginning, and it was part of my platform when I ran for the state house in 2018, earning me an A rating from NORML. So my platform for county attorney is simple. First, we need to hold those in power accountable when they vote money into their own pockets and take tough stances on public corruption. We need to reform our criminal justice system by prioritizing the crimes that matter, reducing our incarceration rate, ending cash bail, and holding police accountable when they break the rules. And last, we need to make sure that this office stays out of our private lives. And it's not just marijuana. It's that this office is poised to prosecute the private healthcare decisions of everyone in Maricopa County, including birth control and abortion if Roe v. Wade falls. So I'm looking forward to this evening, and I'm looking forward to working with this organization to make this happen and ensuring that NORML will have a seat at the table when it comes to policies around cannabis and marijuana in our county. For more information about me and my platform, you can join me at Gunnigle2020.com. Facebook, Gunnigle 2020, and I'm on Twitter at Julie Gunnigle. It is a privilege to be here with you this evening.
Tom, we can't hear you.
Sorry, just thank you, Mrs. Gunnigle. I'm going to give you some advice that I'm not following very well, and that is, if you could please mute if you're joined in, there's a little bit of coughing we heard, some other, rough rustling of papers, that kind of thing. If all of you could try and mute yourself when you're not speaking, and then unmute yourself when it's your time to talk. If you make the mistake that I'm making, which is forget to unmute yourself, we'll remind you, because you can still hear us, but it's helpful so we can hear everybody very clearly. That's my suggestion to you. It's certainly not an order. It's a simple, friendly suggestion moving forward. All right, next, Will Knight, would you please make an opening statement?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you to AZ NORML and all the viewers tonight. My name is Will Knight. I am a Colombian immigrant and an American citizen, and I am running for Maricopa County Attorney because I've been directly impacted. That happens to also be why I believe in second chances. Most of you watching know that Maricopa County is the most punitive county in the 4th most incarcerated state, in the most incarcerated country in the world. That the us versus them tough on crime policies yesterday have saddled 1 out of 13 Arizonans with a felony conviction, preventing them from getting work and joining the economy. And nearly 21% of the 42,000 people in our Department of Corrections are there for simple drug possession. When we are spending nearly $1.2 billion a year on our Department of Corrections, but shortchanging our educators, then we desperately need reform. But to get that reform, we need a county attorney who truly understands this, who's in this for the community and not for their career. And that's me. I've dedicated my entire career to improving the administration of justice, and I have a lot of relevant experience. In fact, I think I have the most relevant experience of any candidate in this race. I'm a Valley-educated lawyer. I got my start here in the Valley in prosecution until I had an unpleasant experience with my predecessor, Bill Montgomery. I moved on to some of the top civil law firms in the state, where I got to work on some really important civil rights cases, like marriage equality and exonerating the wrongly convicted. For the last 4 years, I've been a public defender. I'm also an educator, and I'm a community leader in the local and national Hispanic bars. But what really makes me the most qualified candidate is my deep personal experience from being directly impacted. I know about the war on drugs because my family was kidnapped and trafficked by violent cartels in the 1980s because of that policy. And I know how our prisons absolutely decimate families and communities, because my only memory of my father was saying goodbye to him when I was 4 years old, right before he went to federal prison, and I never saw him again. But more important than all of that, I personally know how this system otherizes and erects barriers to people to prevent them from rejoining society long after they've paid their debts. Because when I was 18, I was rebellious. I got kicked out of high school for not going to class, and I had to go to a last chance high school. Nobody was more surprised than me when I graduated. So I went out to celebrate with my friends. We went to the only bar in town that would sell drinks to 18-year-olds. And ultimately I got arrested and convicted for an underage drinking misdemeanor. That was a defining moment in my life for me, though. I remember sitting in a jail cell and being, of course, deeply ashamed. But even more than that, I was afraid, not just of where I was. I was terrified I was going to end up like my dad. So that was a defining moment. And in a lot of ways, it made me a justice system success story. My journey here to serve you has been one of reclaiming my past, of owning my past mistakes, and more importantly, standing up and saying that people can rejoin society. I believe in second chances, and if you do too, then I'm your candidate.
Third, if you can, mute your microphone while others are speaking. Next, we have our third candidate tonight, Robert McWhirter. Robert, please make your opening remarks.
Good evening. Thank you for having us here at this this forum. You know, I've heard some of the criminal justice kind of ideas of both Julie and Will, and frankly, there's not a lot to disagree with in terms of those. But I think it's important to focus on what this job is about. At the end of the day, this job is about effectively prosecuting people. The county attorney needs to wake up every morning and think about how to make you safer from crime. That means there needs to be people who are arrested, who are prosecuted, and who have to go to prison. Now, that being said, mass incarceration does not make us safer from crime. The criminalization of addiction does not make us safer from crime, nor mental health, nor even poverty. And the criminalization of marijuana usage makes absolutely nobody safer from crime. It's a simple matter of that. And I agree with several of the other points that have already been made about that. What I think this race is very much about is integrity. We have had a county attorney's office that has put ideology over integrity, especially when it's come to marijuana policy. It's always this ideology, to the point where you have Bill Montgomery insulting a veteran on the issue of marijuana simply because of ideology. And there's a lot of dirty little secrets about how marijuana gets prosecuted in the county. The fact that it is still a Class 6 felony is an absolute absurdity and does not make anybody any safer. I have 30 years, or actually more than 30 years, of ethical lawyering that I can bring to this. And that's what's been solely lacking in that office. From Andrew Thomas, which, by the way, I wrote the bar complaint that got Andrew Thomas disbarred. Through Bill Montgomery, there was just a bar, the Arizona Supreme Court just announced the ethical sanctions against prosecutor Juan Martinez. Well, I wrote that bar complaint too, because at the end of the day, this is about ethics. And if you have candidates who are puffing their qualifications, candidates who have had criminal convictions, who have not been honest about it since the start of this campaign or since their entire career, that brings into real problem ethical questions. And we can't criticize the utter lack of ethics, especially on this issue of marijuana prosecution, if we're not going to make sure that our candidates are held to those standards. The standards that I've lived by for 30 years of lawyering and that my clients have had the right to expect from me. And in no way what I say retreats in any way from what's a broad criminal justice reform platform. But the point of this is to go forward with a clear sense of integrity and ethics, and to have somebody who can actually beat Alistair Adele come November. And that's why I offered, among many other qualifications, for this job. And I ask for your support and your vote. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McWhirter.
Excuse me, hold on. Can I be clear about something? Bob, are you accusing me of not being honest about this during my career or during this campaign?
Well, you need to answer a question, which is, when you've talked about having a minor in consumption charge, the question is, were you behind the wheel of a car when you were arrested? That's the question, sir. And I think you need to answer it.
Well,
and by the way,
Mr.
it was only 2 weeks ago that you've actually mentioned this during the campaign, but you need to answer that question. Were you behind the wheel of a car? That's the question.
Mr. Knight, obviously we'll give you an opportunity to address that, those remarks, if you'd like now or later.
Yeah, no, I'd absolutely like to now. Thank you. That is, and to be clear, Bob, you're also accusing me of being dishonest during my career, because that's what you said, right? I'm going to take you at your word on that. I'm going to take you at your word when you said that last Thursday, and I was staggered. That's an incredible and serious accusation. And sadly, it's not the first time that I've had to deal with it. It's probably not going to be the last either. So setting aside what it's like for a young person who makes a mistake, who accepts responsibility for it, who pays their debt to society, and then tries to do better, setting aside how that's impacted me before law school, in college, in employment practices, let's talk about just since then. Let's talk about how, even just in the last decade, I was shamed by the city of Phoenix for that, because they didn't believe me when I told them that I wasn't impaired, that I was underage, that I had a BAC of 0.021, that it was about being underage, not being impaired, that I was shamed by APAC, who actually changed their application protocols to make sure that no future Truman Young Fellows could have a background like mine. Again, putting up barriers to prevent people with perspective and experience from helping our community. I was shamed by Tempe, by the FBI, by the U.S. Attorney's Office. Ultimately, they did give me clearances because, unlike some people, they saw past it and they gave me a top secret clearance. But ultimately, I was shamed worse by the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, by our elected predecessor, Bill Montgomery, who told me that that experience made me unqualified to serve our community. He said exactly what you just said, Bob. And since then, I was also shamed by the bar. They asked me to fly all the way back to Georgia, to Kennesaw, to get the records out of bankers' boxes, pre-digital records, which I did. And I came back and I produced those records then. And I ultimately was licensed, of course. But you know, when it started to get really silly was not the first, not the second, not the third, not the fourth, not even the fifth time that I had to disclose this to the Chief Justice of our Supreme Court to get reappointed to the Commission on Access to Justice or the Commission on Minorities in the Judiciary, or to help hire judges. It started to get really silly at that point, realizing that 2 decades of this has been following me around. But thank you, Bob. Let me thank you for this. I've owned it on the trail. I think maybe that LD meeting you're referring to was probably the first time you heard it. But during this entire campaign trail, dozens of organizations, dozens of leaders, dozens of elected officials and candidates, and multiple LD meetings. And in fact, that one you're talking about, I put it on the internet myself the next day. So the implication that I've been dishonest during my career is incredibly reckless, and that is a dangerous quality in a county attorney who is supposed to move on full information. The point here is I don't owe you anything, Bob. I don't have to answer your question. We need to stop shaming and otherizing people, and we need to empower people to rejoin the community. That's what makes us safer.
Oh, excuse me, sir. Did you drive a car?
1 second,
Mr. Actually not convicted of a DUI and not, okay, I beg your pardon. Go ahead,
okay.
sir.
1 second, just I'm going to kind of lay the ground rules here shortly. We are going to give opportunity, though, anytime there's a personal reference to one of the other candidates, they'll get an opportunity to directly respond to that. We haven't gotten to the questions yet, but this came up early, and it's something certainly that we want to provide a forum to discuss anything like this. And we want to make sure that we allow the candidates to be have an opportunity both to make any particular observations about their opponents, or to also certainly answer any of those observations or accusations. We will have an opportunity again throughout the questions this evening where that might come up again. But if I may, Mr. McWhirter, unless you have maybe 10 seconds of something,
10 seconds.
Go ahead and move forward. But if you want those 10 seconds, go ahead.
Yes, please. Thank you. I noticed that during that entire, I don't disagree with the idea of second chances at all. In my 30 years of practice, that's been a benchmark. But I noticed, Will, that you didn't answer the question. Were you behind the wheel of a car? You have stated that this was a minor in consumption. Was that the true charge? Were you truly charged and convicted of minor in consumption, or were you behind the wheel of a car? That's the question, sir.
Okay, and Mr. Knight, 10 seconds. Again, I know that you've already, I think maybe you fully already provided the response, but I'll give you 10
I just want to say thanks again for making our point. Our county needs fewer Andrew Thomases and Bill Montgomerys riding high horses and casting stones, and more people who believe in second chances. That's flippant and irresponsible, and I'm proud of who I am and how I serve my community.
Okay, and then real quick, I know this didn't really have to do with you, Mrs. Gunnigle, but if there's anything that you wanted to add at this point, you can, otherwise we'll move forward.
Let's move on.
All right, let's move on. Okay, so thank you, candidates. We really appreciate those opening statements. We're gonna move on into the question portion of this now. The questions for tonight will be given in a round robin format. Each question will be posed in random order to the candidates in alphabetical order. The candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question, and then the other two will have 1 minute each to also comment on that question or on the answer that the other candidate gave. If a candidate, again, should refer to another candidate during their remarks, then the candidate referred to will get a chance to rebut or to respond. We're going to go in alphabetical order, as I mentioned, but first, do we have Mr. Rodriguez?
Yes, we do.
There he is. All right. We do have a very special guest tonight, and to pose the first question of tonight's forum, we have the 2016 Democrat nominee for this office, the county attorney's office, now a state representative in District 27. Please welcome, for the first question and introductory remarks, Representative Diego Rodriguez.
Thank you, everyone, and good evening. To the candidates, I would like to say welcome tonight. Congratulations on getting on the ballot. You're coming up on the early stages of a marathon that is going to test your mettle. It's going to require you to answer tough questions, but more than anything, it's going to require you to prove to the people of the county of our county, Maricopa County, why they should trust you with this very important office. And you know that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. But going back to 2016, when I ran for county attorney, I made it one of the first planks in my platform was the support of ending the prohibition against adult use cannabis. So this was 4 years ago, and it doesn't seem that long ago, but time does fly. You know, I got to know many people in the community. Mike and I have talked, I've lost track of how many times Mike and I have talked. Mr. Dean and I have talked a few times as well. as well. I've been to many events. And one thing that I know that people in the adult use cannabis community care about is the level of commitment that a candidate has to this issue. So if you could, please tell us about your history advocating for the end of criminalization, or, and let me put it a different way, tell us about your history since 2016, what you've done to support the end of cannabis prohibition.
And Tom, it's to me first, right?
Yes.
Representative Rodriguez, first, thank you so much for joining us this evening and for overseeing this. And I hope that when you return to the legislature after the 2020 election, it is as a member of the majority and governing party at our state legislature. You're part of that change that we need. So yes, I have been an advocate for the decriminalization of adult use cannabis since before 2016. But I can tell you what I've done. In 2018, I ran for the legislature so that I could serve with people like you. I knocked 40,000 doors. My campaign did. We had the third highest voter contact rate in all of the Valley. We spent a lot of time talking at doors, incidentally, in Legislative District 15 about prohibition and cannabis and marijuana use. And I think you'd be surprised that it was one of the top subjects that came up at our doors. By and large, and I think everybody on this call knows this, that Arizona wants recreational use cannabis. In fact, 55% of us here in Maricopa County do. So as part of my campaign, we knocked those doors, we had those conversations, we flipped 16 points, still not enough that I could come join you, but have been a vocal proponent since far before that election.
Okay, now consistent with the rules we have, that was your 2-minute response to that question. Each of the other candidates now will have a 1 minute to follow up each to that question. So next in alpha, I'm sorry, were you done? Were you done?
Oh no, I thought that the rules were changed up, that everybody got 2 minutes to respond to every question. Pardon me if I'm wrong.
Let me refer to Michael Weiser. Have we changed the original rules there about responding to the questions?
Yes, we have, because we want everybody to have enough time to elaborate and not be stuck only responding to the first candidate.
All right, well, I have to say,
Julie.
Mrs. Gunnigle, thank you for pointing that out. It's not the first time that
keeping you honest, Tom.
That a prosecutor has had to correct me, but and hopefully it might not be the last, but we will see. So let's move on now to the next candidate in alphabetical order. Will Knight, you now also have 2 full minutes to respond to that question.
Thank you. Just about everything that I've been involved in over the last 4 years in some form or another has helped toward that. I sit on the Commission on Access to Justice, where we've worked to rewrite the rules for evictions, hoping to help people who are getting otherized and pushed out of the system, sometimes because of misdemeanor convictions for marijuana, things like that. I sit on the Commission on Minorities in the Judiciary, where not only do we promote diversity in the profession and on the bench, which, as you know, marijuana convictions incredibly disproportionately disadvantage Black and Latinx communities, but also to address the incredibly high rates of juvenile convictions and juveniles in adult court that are often related to marijuana offenses. At the Public Defender's Office, I was in our specialty division. I worked hard with my colleagues, covered for them in the drug court dockets, but more important than any of that, I stood up to run for office here and to speak truth, and I have the most comprehensive platform for ending the mass incarceration crisis, and a big part of that means going with you to decriminalizing marijuana and not prosecuting it, but going way further than that as well, to promoting public safety by giving people second chances, by removing from the scrutiny of our felony courts minor possession offenses, period, and promoting public health and safety by giving people civil sanctuaries where they can go for overdose prevention, substance use treatment, and to recover when they're ready in a destigmatized, deotherized manner.
Okay, thank you for that comment, Mr. Knight. Our third candidate, Robert McWhirter, would you please respond to the question that Mr. Rodriguez posed?
Well, thank you. Yeah, to be specific to the answer to the question, this is my first time as a public candidate, so it's my first time as a candidate to advocate exactly for this agenda of the decriminalization of marijuana. I've seen the ravages of this in the practice that's spanned over 30 years, and the absurdity of the prosecutions of marijuana and what it's done to people's lives. I will also say that I have sat on the ACLU Board of Directors for at least a decade, where we actually publicly advocated for the revising of marijuana laws. It's been a long, hard fight, and I've been committed to that fight for well over 30 years. And so that's really what I have to offer to that. You know, just to give you some ideas of how this really affects things, we don't have particularly good statistics on how criminal justice affects people because mostly the prosecutors so far have refused to keep them. We do know, because of a comprehensive ACLU study that was done county by county across the country, that a young Black person in Arizona, excuse me, specifically Maricopa County, is 3.6 times more likely to be prosecuted for a marijuana offense than a young white person. There is no statistical difference in the usage between those two groups. That is an objectifiable way that shows the unfairness and the racial disparity in the criminal justice system. And nothing can show it better than marijuana prosecutions, which again, does nothing to make anybody safer. And indeed, the illegality is what makes us less safe. So that is my commitment to that issue. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. All three of you, very impressive responses. We appreciate you being directly responsive to the questions being asked. I know that, listen, this is politics, and we're also lawyers, and lawyers running for the chief prosecutor job. So we understand if it gets a little rough in terms of how we're going to proceed today. Of course, we always want to insist on everyone, though, maintaining a modicum of professionalism and decency towards one another. And that's in no way meant to censor or attempt to censor any of your comments tonight. We want to hear what you have to say, and we want that to be as unfiltered as possible. But this is an important office, and with a tremendous amount of power that one of you three, hopefully, will occupy here in the not too distant future. So bearing that in mind, again, the questions tonight will be in a round robin fashion. We'll go in alphabetical order. We had the previous question was asked first to Mrs. Gunnigle, so we will be starting the next question with Will Knight. Each question will be allow for a 2-minute answer by each candidate. And so each candidate, in other words, will have 2 full minutes to answer each of the questions. Again, if one of the candidates should refer to another candidate directly during their remarks, the other candidate who was referred to will have an opportunity in fairness to respond to that or to rebut that. So the next question goes to Will Knight, and that question is, let's see, let's get right down to it. Arguably, Arizona has the harshest marijuana laws in the country. What is your opinion about the current policies of the Maricopa County Attorney's Office regarding the enforcement of what many would characterize as draconian laws?
Specifically with this county attorney's office?
Yeah, I think the question is that it's specific to Maricopa County. What is your opinion about the current policies in place? Primarily, that would be under Bill Montgomery. Yeah. And as it relates to the enforcement of marijuana laws in general.
So, I have a lot of experience in this space. Thank you for the fun question. Early on in my career, I got started at the law firm that sued Governor Brewer for failing to implement the regulatory scheme So we did a poor job from the beginning as a state and here as a county in implementing the AMMA. I also did a little bit of work representing dispensaries in the early days back then, before that became a very sort of specialized form of practice, and I moved on with my career. In criminal practice, tons of experience in this space. And not just in criminal prosecution in Illinois or federal criminal defense at the Federal Public Defender's Office. I mean, lots of experience in Maricopa County at the Maricopa County Public Defender's Office dealing with this county prosecutor's criminal enforcement practices. I've represented thousands of people who've been charged in Superior Court, and as we know, tons of those people are charged with simple possession, including marijuana offenses, and particularly the disproportionately impacted communities, the Black and Latinx communities. I've represented a lot of folks who come from there because as a public defender, that's who you help most. According to the ACLU, marijuana arrests still make up half of all drug arrests in the United States. Maricopa County is one of the worst offenders there. The odor of marijuana alone here in Maricopa County is one of the easiest ways that law enforcement officers can legally begin an encounter, even if somebody has a medical marijuana card, because it's the only form of medication where you have to carry your proof around with you. So I'm not a big fan of Maricopa County's enforcement practices, whether it's civilly or criminally. Our prison numbers have been going up for marijuana possession for some time. And even the current county attorney, Alistair Adele, says that's a travesty, though the real secret is that even though she said she's not going to be prosecuting marijuana possession when she took office, she had been right up until the pandemic. So our current system here is a nightmare. And that's why I have, as I said before, the most comprehensive plan. Look at our plans side by side on our ACLU questionnaires. I encourage it. The most comprehensive plan. It's going to go far beyond just marijuana, and it's going to save us $400 million a year.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. Again, I want to emphasize, Mr. Weiser stated, we did invite the person who occupies the office of the Maricopa County Attorney to participate in this debate. She did not accept that invitation, and so she is not here, but I want everyone to know that she had ample opportunity to do so. Next question, next person, next candidate, Mr. McWhirter, Bob McWhirter. Please, would you provide us with an answer to that question? If you'd like me to repeat it, I certainly will.
No, I think I understand it. My sense is you're putting questions 2 and 3 together, which is perfectly fine. Look, I don't think really what was just described really even describes the scope of the problem here. There are many things done in the county prosecution of crime, especially the crime of prosecuting marijuana, that is done for the purpose of enhancing county budgets. The dirty secret about marijuana prosecution is it's not about deterrence. It's not about giving a criminal sanction or enforcing the law. It is very often about $1,750 in fines, fees, and surcharges that criminal defendants caught with a joint have to pay in order to avoid that criminal conviction. And you have a huge amount of county government being funded by these fines, fees, and surcharges, and some to very beneficial ends, et cetera, but that's really not the point. The point is it works as a regressive tax on the poor, and it perpetuates this problem. And it also is a way of funding expensive county budgets and county criminal budgets with misplaced priorities that have no sense of how this affects the taxpayer by hiding those expenses from the taxpayer by imposing fines, fees, and surcharges for something that by any measure could not be a crime that deserves this kind of attention, et cetera. The fines, fees, and surcharges is what this is about. So when you have county attorneys jumping up and arguing about the evils of weed and all this kind of stuff, I think what the real issue is the budgetary mechanisms that they're trying to protect. And again, that is a crushing, regressive tax on the poor, on our communities of color, and that is what's the dirty secret about what's going on here. That has to be called out and changed. The marijuana prosecution is one example of this, and it is a very egregious example indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie Gunnigle, you also have an opportunity to respond to this question. Would you like me to repeat it?
No, I got it. And I can be quick. What do you call something that has no deterrent effect, does not keep people safe, disproportionately targets Black, brown, and marginalized communities, and is instituted for no other reason than to pad the county's budget? You call it corruption. So we should tackle it head on. And I think the very first thing that we need to do is stop prosecuting low-level marijuana cases. It's been a part of my platform since day one, and I think we more or less all agree on this.
Okay, great. Thank you. And Mr. McWhirter, you get the lead on the next question. Thanks to organizations like NORML, medical marijuana reform has swept across most of the nation over the last 25 years. What is your position on medical marijuana in general and on Arizona's medical marijuana program in particular?
Well, I think medical marijuana has been a great benefit to society and a great benefit to those people suffering real, true chronic pain. And I think we should definitely have the expansion. My only criticism of that is the way this has been implemented has become very costly, again, to the poor. Because if you look at the numbers about the amount of costs to get a medical marijuana license, the costs of some of the products, the fact that you can only buy 1.6 or 1.4 grams at a single purchase that keeps people from making bulk purchases. So my problem with it is it becomes a rich person's benefit, which is not the intent. And it should be made much more available. Now, just realize that civil marijuana policy is not exactly the purview of the county attorney. The county attorney's purview is criminal law for the most part, with the exception of a small civil section. And I think the issue there has to be the absolute stopping of any prosecution of medical marijuana, which has been, if not done, at least threatened and hinted at by prior county attorneys. That has to stop so that this benefit to society can grow and become a firmly embedded part of society to help people who are in real pain and real medical needs. And it's just a great social benefit from that point. There really should be no debate on medical marijuana, and I find it absurd that there actually is a debate even on medical marijuana, given what the clear benefits have been. If you do everything by what's evidence-driven, this shouldn't even be a discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. I think if I could offer my remark, you're right that the primary function, as it might touch upon medical marijuana of the county attorney's office, would be primarily in its enforcement of the criminal laws and its interpretation of the Medical Marijuana Act. I do know that under our previous county attorney, Bill Montgomery, we saw more than that, though. We saw attempts to even impact the industry, zoning, the White Mountain versus, I believe it was Arizona, Maricopa County Board of Supervisors case. Yes, you're absolutely right. It is mostly in the criminal law, but we also see, because it's such a powerful office, the ability for it to also impact other areas of law if by no other means, but just the fact that the county attorney's office is the main, the county attorney is the main individual who advises the other county agencies and even the Board of Supervisors. So thank you for that, Mr. McWhirter. I think that, let's see, we have next who can respond to that question would be Mrs. Gunnigle. Please, would you let us know what you think?
Well, yes. I mean, and just to add to that, Bill Montgomery and Sheila Polk engaged in a very targeted harassment campaign of medical marijuana patients. We saw that with the Rodney Jones case. We saw that with what was quite honestly a laughable interpretation of the law that they chose to take. Now, your Maricopa County Attorney's Office, as one of the largest prosecutor's office in the country, really ought to be a thought leader in many of these ways. And what we've seen is the total abdication of any sort of national leadership role that could originate out of this office. So I think what this question is trying to get at is, will you be another Bill Montgomery? And the answer to that is no, of course not. In fact, I'm willing to go a heck of a lot further than that with the campaign to deprioritize marijuana prosecutions and decriminalize marijuana throughout our county. I would be remiss, since you asked my opinion, about the implementation, though, on the civil side, because I think it is fraught with problems and potential for corruption. The independent auditor just recently saw that mass monetary malfeasance, and we know that the money that's going into our medical marijuana program is not being spent as it should. And I think patients are entitled to get their medicine and know that it's safe. Note that if there's a complaint against a dispensary, that the regulating body, the Arizona Department of Health Services, should be taking action on that. And what we're seeing time and time again is that they're not using these funds effectively. In fact, they're actively misdirecting them to other regulatory uses instead of what they should be used for. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. And also, we're going to go right back to you, Mrs. Gunnigle, because you, I believe, are next up on the in the alphabetical order.
I think Mr. Knight gets a chance. Mr. Knight gets a chance.
I believe that Mrs. Gunnigle had the first question for Mr. Rodriguez.
No, he gets a chance.
Will hasn't had his opportunity to speak.
Sorry,
yet.
I'm
Will
sorry.
gets a chance.
So sorry, you're right. My apologies, Mr. Knight. My apologies. Yes, you have not weighed in on this second question. Please, if you would, and my apologies.
No worries at all. And I think I can be succinct also. You hit it on the nose, and I agree with Ms. Gunnigle also. We need fewer Bill Montgomerys and Andrew Thomases riding moral high horses. What we need are innovators, and we need to be thinking ahead toward the ways we can use marijuana civilly to make Maricopa County more successful and safer. I mean, I mentioned earlier, even as a medication, it's the only kind of medication that you have to affirmatively carry around your prescription. And now that we've migrated toward electronic medical marijuana cards, there's an additional access barrier there for people who need that medication desperately. In the AMMA, the people wrote specifically that the purpose of the law is to protect patients with debilitating medical conditions, as well as their physicians and providers. That according to the FBI, 99 out of 100 marijuana arrests in the US are made under state law, and that's why changing state law will have the practical effect of protecting people from arrest. As the only candidate with any substantial degree of civil experience, this is a top priority. This is why I have such a comprehensive plan, not just for ending mass incarceration, but what we're going to do with those incredible $400 million+ per year that we save to create civil programs, overdose prevention sites for other kinds of drugs. Marijuana is not an addictive drug or a lethal drug, but we have problems with those too that also need to be handled civilly. Just imagine if Sheriff Penzone had a good civil attorney with experience in civil rights who could advise him about how to avoid civil rights lawsuits, as well as the rest of our county agencies. I mean, we just had a big lawsuit that impacted public health between our county recorder and our attorney general, prohibiting the county recorder from sending mail-in ballots during a pandemic. Imagine if we had a good civil attorney in the county attorney's office to be an ally to Adrian Fontes during that fight. A lot of people wouldn't have had to put their health at risk.
10 seconds.
Okay, that's interesting. And let me ask you, as my penance for almost passing you over, what are you suggesting that there would be that you would appoint a specific deputy county attorney as a, let's say, liaison to the jail, who would be responsible for seeking to avoid some of these abuses that we've seen over there, both under the former sheriff and even now under, in many instances, now we're seeing problems with Mr. Penzone, Sheriff Penzone.
Absolutely, and I like Sheriff Penzone. I think he could do better, and I think having a good civil attorney in this office to help him would help him do better. It'll give him the cover of some civil counsel, so he maybe is experiencing some political fear. I don't know, but I know he can do better. This is why it's critically important. Our county attorney is our chief civil legal officer. People tend to forget about that. The county attorney is responsible for representing all of our state, all of our county agencies in state and federal litigation, just from a responsible government perspective. As far as I can recall, at least in the last 20, 30 years, we haven't had a county attorney who's versed at all in that space. But from a responsible government perspective, from a fiscally responsible perspective, and also a civil rights perspective, we have a huge civil division there. And they're mostly talented attorneys, but without direction at the top, pointing them at our problem areas, and involvement from the community helping us identify those problem areas, we're doing ourselves a disservice. So as your county attorney, I'm going to be proactive, I'm going to innovate, and I'm going to rely not just on my criminal experience here in Maricopa County, but my civil experience to improve the administration of justice for all of us.
Thank you, Mr. Knight. I'll give 10 seconds each to the other candidates if they want to follow up to that. in any way?
Well,
Bob?
yeah, I'll follow up briefly. First of all, frankly, Julie has more civil experience than that, number one. Number two, Paul Penzone has his own lawyers. The function of county government is there is a county attorney that advises the county sheriff on compliance issues, but for any civil rights issue, that Paul Penzone has his own lawyers. And I'm sorry, spending, 3 years as a junior associate in big law firms doesn't make you qualified to do that. Mr. Penzone has his own lawyers. That's just kind of a red herring. What people worry about this job, what the voters worry about this job is, if they think about it all, they think it's like an episode of Law and Order. They want to know what makes them safe from crime. And there are good civil lawyers there. Their jobs are different, but that's just kind of puffing a qualification that really is not relevant. Thanks.
I think a lot of people are also wanting to feel safe from law enforcement abuse or prosecutorial, the abuse of prosecutorial discretion. Mrs. Gunnigle, do you want a brief opportunity to also follow up on that?
No, actually, yes, I do. You know, I've been in civil litigation for going on 5 years, actually, I think this month. In this county, I represent disabled school children who have trouble accessing education. I represent small businesses, and I represent people whose reproductive rights are at stake. I know that isn't viewed as substantial by some, but I think it is important, and bears mention that experience is also there.
Right, great, thank you. And actually, I believe you get the next question, unless I'm back out of order. Mrs. Gunnigle, although the people of Arizona continue to approve in poll after poll of medical marijuana, and given that the purpose of the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act is to protect cardholders from criminal prosecution, historically, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office has interpreted the Medical Marijuana Act narrowly against the rights and interests of cardholders over the course of the last 10 years. Will you commit to interpret the provisions of the Medical Marijuana Act in favor of patient rights instead? Why or why not?
Well, I mean, that's a affirmative heck yes. And I love you, Tom, but I think that was the last question, and we're on to the next one.
No,
and if I may give you a shout out, I have moderated more than my fair share of debates and appellate arguments and trial advocacy skirmishes, and you are doing an amazing job. It is so hard to keep the round robin effectively going.
It's not, it's actually, you know, it's probably touches on similar ideas, but it is a separate question. These questions, just so everyone knows, I didn't write. I have attempted to edit them in a way that is maybe more pertinent. But this question, the last question was, what is your position on medical marijuana in general and on Arizona's medical marijuana program in particular? This question is, will you commit to interpret the provisions of the Medical Marijuana Act in favor of patient rights? Because in the existing and previous administration, it was without exception interpreted in a way, any kind of ambiguity or any provision that hadn't been interpreted in the past was always interpreted against patient interests. Someone brought up the question of the Jones case, the case involving whether concentrates were permitted under the Medical Marijuana Act. Well, it was Bill Montgomery who first took the position that it did not, and denied a 10-year-old boy the ability to use a tincture for a debilitating and ultimately terminal illness, because he said he should have to smoke it instead, interpreting the Medical Marijuana Act in a way that certainly the drafters and the voters never intended. So the question is, will you commit to always interpret the Medical Marijuana Act where it might be subject to interpretation in a way that favors the protection of patient rights? And why, or if not, then why not?
Well, that's an unqualified yes.
Okay. Okay, that's your answer? All right, then let's move to Will Knight. Will Knight, I think that some of these questions probably overlap a little bit. Thank you for Ms. Gunnigle, I think, just pointing out the fact that there might have been a little redundancy.
I'd be happy to answer that question.
Go for it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, of course, we're going to interpret the law in favor of patients. That's what was said in the purpose of the law from the get-go. And that's one of the reasons we need to stop electing Andrew Thomas's and Bill Montgomery's, who are going to sit atop their moral high horse and impose their opinion on the people. That's exactly what happened when our county attorney tried to litigate the wax case you were just talking about, tried to impose their moral values or judgments over a duly passed initiative, over the will of the people. The job of an executive officer is to carry out the law faithfully and to supervise our finite resources in the exercise of their discretion, where you prioritize which laws to carry out. It is certainly not to actively undermine or attempt to, through litigation, repeal duly elected laws or other matters that are of significant importance to the public and to public health.
I'd also now like to turn to Robert McWhirter. Would you like to respond to that question?
Well, we've just heard two responses to that question. One I thought was brilliant, and I'm going to copy it. Unequivocally, yes.
All right, great. Okay, now I know that we had a couple of deviations from our format. We do have some additional questions. I think you guys know what those are. Is everybody okay with where we're at right now and prepared to continue? All right, great. So this next one goes to Will Knight. Would you please, some consider the policies at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office relating to marijuana offenses to be far too harsh in plea offer guidelines and charging decisions, etc. And I'm going to combine a couple of questions so that we can move forward. Those guidelines have never been made available to the public, for example. So we have these existing policies that have created a culture, some would say, in the Maricopa County Attorney's Office over the course of the last few years. How would you enact policies that would counteract that kind of sense of anti-marijuana culture? What would you do to go about addressing what is probably, endemic in the county attorney's office today? How would you do that?
Well, we need cultural reform first and foremost. That's really the core of what we've been talking about during this debate. And it's a core issue for my campaign. It's something both of my colleagues have mentioned, but it's something I have deep personal experience with. For all the reasons that are getting thrown around in the air here tonight, I think we need to tear down the barriers, tear down the stigma, and hire people who have accepted responsibility for things and are ready to help and serve their community. We need to empower our marginalized communities, hire more Black and brown prosecutors. So I'm a big supporter of eliminating ban the box policies, and further than ban the box, actually completely blind employment practices, because ban the box also disproportionately impacts Black and Latinx communities, believe it or not. I mentioned I have the most comprehensive plan for what we shouldn't do as a county attorney's office. But one affirmative thing I'm going to do is take that policy manual and shred it. We're not going to litigate by numbers. We're not going to treat people like the statute that they are accused of committing or whatever convictions that they have on their record on paper. We're going to take each case by case, and by encouraging my county attorneys to work with the defense bar, to visit prisons, to go to defense bar CLEs, and to understand the humanity of the process that we're working in. We're going to fundamentally move away from a tough on crime approach where we sit on our high horses and we point the finger at people and we tell them they have no value. And we're going to move toward an approach of harm reduction, toward an approach where we ask what happened in this case, what do we need to do to redress that harm, and what do we need to do to set all the people involved, if there's a victim, the victim, but also the accused, to rejoin society and to become a contributing member. The vast majority of crime arises out of desperation, mental illness, addiction, poverty. And the answer to that is the only consistently proven way to reduce crime and recidivism. That's education and economic opportunity.
Great, thank you for that answer. And now moving to Mr. McWhirter, would you like to provide an answer to that question?
Well, sure. Look, a lot of these questions are kind of written in a way that you can't disagree with them. And normally I'd have something to say with that, but the point is, I don't disagree with them. I don't disagree with them. I mean, how can you disagree with these questions, the way they're phrased and even the way they're not phrased? You know, fine.
Well, I think that very easily if you ask Bill Montgomery. Well,
thank you for pointing out that I'm not Bill Montgomery.
Yes.
So I'll take that as a compliment.
Thank you.
But look, you've got a real thing in society where society for decades has been right on marijuana and the police power structure has not been right. And when I say the police, I'm talking about politicians and prosecutors, and they just haven't been right on this issue, and they've left society behind. Society's moved far ahead of this and left the prosecutors behind, and now we're stuck putting people in prison who should not be in prison, and it doesn't make you safer. I am a firm believer in being tough on crime. I believe in being tough on the crime that hurts people. This office is about prosecuting dangerous people. It's about prosecuting murderers and rapists and making society safer. But when you get into the marginalization of people who have addictions and could be better served, and we would be better served if we did that, or mental health problems, or poverty, or marijuana prosecutions, I think we have to approach this by that is not what's tough on crime. It's taxpayer abuse, and it's a horrible way to treat human beings. But that's really what this is all about. So I'll interpret your question as, what is this really all about? And I think that's what it's really all about. And it's that sensitivity to the need for this social change and really put our direction on being tough on crime. And when you have sitting there marijuana prosecutions sitting around in the same courtroom where somebody's charged with a first-degree murder, the utter absurdity of that dichotomy is irrefutable. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Knight, could we hear from you, sir?
I didn't quite catch the question. Could you repeat it again? You cut out on my end.
It's Julie's turn.
It's
Julie's turn. It's Julie's turn.
Yes, sorry. Could you go ahead and
I'll be
always you. I'm picking on you. I'm picking on you, Julie. I'm so sorry, but yes, would you please make an answer to that last question?
I told you at the beginning, Tom, I'm going to keep you honest. No, just a few points to add on to it, because what this office really does need is that sort of bold, transformative, transparent leadership. And I think there's a few things that we need to be absolutely clear on. First, incarceration is a billion-dollar industry in our state and county government, right? Nevertheless, even those of us who are committed to decarceration, we don't get to spend that money when we save the taxpayers that money. We don't get to build that great society. So the best that we can do through the prosecutor's role is make sure that we're transparent and make sure that we're giving that leadership. So just to briefly hit on 2 points that we haven't heard yet. Yes, we need to revamp the policy manual completely in this office. But once we do that, we need to make sure that it's online, publicly available without having to go 100+ days through a FOIA request process that ultimately ends up in litigation in order to get that. That should be something that the public knows about and can find on a website. Second, with respect to leadership, I think it's so important in this office that you have leadership that is collaborative, that is able to build bridges, even with people that you might not necessarily even agree with. I think one of the big things that a prosecutor can do to make the entire office more fair, though, is to sign on to the FAM Visit a Prison program. When I was a young prosecutor, this is one of the very first things that my boss had me do, is not only did I visit the state prison, but I also visited 2 of the county jails. And I can tell you that that was transformative, being able to sit there and really understand that when you're saying a month, when you're saying a year, when you're saying a decade in court and asking a judge to pass a sentence, that you have a concrete understanding of what that person's life will be like going forward. So that's something that I would absolutely ask all of my prosecutors to sign on to.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, I want to just say that all of your answers have been, I think, very interesting and quite frankly, excellent as far as I'm concerned, especially compared to what we've been having to deal with here over the last few years. I would like to ask one final question, and I certainly would then allow everyone to still make a closing remark if you want to, and you each would get 3 minutes to do that. If I may ask one final question, due to the COVID-19 crisis that we're in, the Maricopa County Attorney's Office has dramatically reduced the number of criminal complaints they are filing. I think right now they're filing about 15% of what they normally would. But law enforcement, and this is a New Times article that came out last week, provided the numbers. Law enforcement continues to refer just as many criminal referrals as they did, 3 months ago. So the police activity hasn't changed, but the county attorney's office is not, for obvious reasons, filing complaints because hearings are all being postponed into the summer, mostly June at the earliest in Maricopa County. Let me ask you this. If you can't file all of the complaints because of the backlog and you're in a triage situation, will you agree that to make potential complaints against nonviolent marijuana offenders to be a low filing priority when things go back online this summer? And that question, I believe, that one, correct me if I'm wrong, that one goes to, is it Julie? Bob?
Who knows, but I'm happy to.
Will? Who wants to jump in? We're all going to get 2 minutes anyhow, so let's go for it. All right, look, we're all at home here. This is a pandemic. I'm at home. I got an 11-year-old here who's trying to offer advice to me about what I'm doing wrong. So I really know that you're all dealing with the same thing too. And the frustrations, especially running a campaign in this, I can't even imagine. So thank you all, though. You're doing an excellent job. Please, if you would, go ahead and lead us off, Mr. McWhirter.
Oh, well, I was going to offer Julie to go first, but that's fine. Look, I think what this pandemic has really given us is a chance to look at things with clear air. When I'm hiking in the morning, I realize I get up on top of the mountain, I say, God, the air is really clear because it's cleared out a lot of the pollution in the system, right? Those cases that aren't being prioritized for prosecution begs the question of whether they should have ever been charged in the first place or even referred. I think we refer far too many charges, but then let's just be clear about something. And I think this is very important. Many of those charges need to be filed. What we have in this country is not only do we have certain communities that are racially disproportionately impacted by criminal prosecution and by law enforcement in a way that is demonstrably statistically racist and wrong. Very often, those very same communities are underserved by the police and the prosecutors in the criminal justice system. If you have a shop in South Phoenix and it gets robbed, you want that case prosecuted and you don't want it shoved on a back burner just because of where you live. So it's a concurrent problem. None of this stuff is easy. Just dealing and facing up to the problems of the racism and the disproportionate impact on communities is hard enough. But then when you add into the underserving of communities that deserve the same justice as everybody else, that's what has to be taken into account. So when you're looking at this backlog, I would look at the cases with an idea to say, look, if these cases weren't charged in the first place, why were charged now? Why were they ever charged? And revamp all policies, but also have an eye to trying to eliminate racial disparities, but also serving everybody fairly, including the people in the marginalized communities who deserve law enforcement as much as anybody else.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to respond?
I'm sorry, you cut out there for a second. Did you say Julie or Will?
Mrs. Gunnigle, would you please respond?
Sure. So it should be the priority of your county attorney's office that certain crimes are a priority, crimes of violence, crimes that target women, children, our seniors, crimes like human trafficking and public corruption. That should be the core of what this office does. And everything else, when we're looking at a crisis, should really fall to the wayside. And I think it is an issue of fundamental fairness that Alistair Adele is not being transparent about what she intends to do with those cases. To have someone know that there's a potential criminal charge coming at some undefined time in the future, knowing that the statute of limitations on so many of the crimes here is 7 years, that they could be out, held in legal limbo for that amount of time with an office that, let's be honest, even when there's not a pandemic, is not known for its speed in handling cases. I think is an issue of due process. And I have been calling on Alistair Adele to be transparent with the county that she serves as to how she's going to handle that massive backlog of cases.
Mr. Knight, please.
Thank you very much. Just making sure I'm unmuted. If I could share my screen real quick, I on my other device.
Sure.
Just to put this into visual context for everybody, this is what we're talking about here. These are the numbers we're talking about. This is Alistair Adele's recent press release about what's going on during the pandemic. And you can see here toward the end of March, this blue line, which is cases being filed by the county attorney, started to drop. But this is the police line you referred to, Tom. So I just want to be very clear. Under my administration, the vast majority of these cases are the ones that we wouldn't be prosecuting in the first place, that don't belong in our felony courts. So when the call of the question is, how are you going to keep from overwhelming the system with this backlog of cases if you were in that position? Well, we wouldn't be in this position in the first place when I'm county attorney, because the vast majority of these cases wouldn't be in our felony courts. They wouldn't be under the purview of our county attorney. We need to stop punishing addiction. We need to stop punishing mental illness, and we need to stop punishing poverty. Poverty-related offenses, minor property offenses like shoplifting, for which we send people to prison in Arizona regularly under a bunch of legal fictions. So I keep harping on this, but it's very important. I have the most comprehensive plan to get this done. It's clear. Take a look at the ACLU questionnaires side by side. I do want to point out, though, to do this requires cultural reform, comprehensive cultural reform. And tough on crime is the culture problem that we're fighting. You heard it again here tonight. And it is incredibly difficult to believe a candidate when they say they believe in our community, they want to help marginalized communities, and they believe in second chances out of one side of their mouth, but the other side of their mouth, they're telling people that they're disqualified from leading, disqualified from serving because of things that happened 2 decades prior.
Okay, thank you very much. And yes, you nailed the thrust of my question there. Thank you. Okay, now I think that let's check with Mr. Robinette, our chapter secretary, because I don't know if we've decided to alter the itinerary here, but we were going to consider questions from our Facebook audience. Mike, are we still looking to do that?
I have 4 questions, but I can condense two. I can do 2 for the sake of brevity. So I have, I'm going to combine 2 questions which were similar and then ask another one.
Okay, great. And then how much time do the candidates have to respond?
I would like, we did not discuss that, but I would like to say a minute.
Okay, let's do 1 minute response. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Robinette for these questions. Take it away, Mike.
Okay. Okay, this is, there were 2 questions, a couple on the Q&A and also from Facebook Live, and I'm going to combine those into this one question, and this is for Mr. McWhirter. How can we trust that you'll be an advocate for people re-entering society and address the obstacles and shame they face when you tried to hold a decades-old conviction against Mr. Knight?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not holding a decades-old conviction against Mr. Knight. Mr. Knight has not answered the question now. The question is, were you behind a wheel of a car when you got your conviction? Was it a minor in possession that you've said now publicly twice, or was it a DUI? You need to answer that question. And you said to me just recently that you don't owe me an answer. And I think you're right. You don't owe me an answer. You owe the voters an answer on that question. I am truly believing about second chances, but you've got to own up to what's gone on in the past. That's what the thing is. And I'm sure that one of Will's people planted that question, and I'm perfectly happy to answer it. But the point is, Will, you need to answer the question. Were you convicted of a DUI, not a minor in consumption, but a DUI at that? And did you report it to the state bar when you applied for admission, which was just 7 years ago in 2013? Did you admit that to the bar when you did so? And if so, will you release your bar application?
Julie,
so that's what the question is. I do believe in second chances, and I do believe in people having them. And reentry is key. So thank you.
I tell you what, Bob, I'll answer that question when you answer the one that was just asked of you.
Would you like to give me more time so I can answer? I'm sure Will give me some of his time so I can answer the question if you'd like, as long as Will gives me the time.
Let's do this. Will, what was the question that you felt was not answered by Mr. McWhirter?
How can the community trust you and believe you when you say you want to help marginalized people, convicted people re-enter society? That was the call of the question. You chose to continue shaming me and otherizing me instead. Although you have neatly departed from the very irresponsible accusation you made at the beginning, which is that I haven't disclosed this to other people. Bob, I think you're the last person that knows about it, and you're running with it, and that's a frightening quality in a county attorney, to be honest.
Okay, Bob, I'm going to give you a chance here, but I also want to give Julie a chance if she wants to weigh in at all on this question. No, Bob, go ahead.
Well, Julie has, of course, taken a gracious and smart position on this right now, and I commend that. But I will point out, Will, you still haven't answered the question. Now, the question I was asked by the person that you had plant that question right now is, how can I be trusted to do that? I have 30 years of practice where I have represented the most marginalized of society, the most degraded, and the people who have been most abused in society. I have been there every day. I remember standing in court about 12 years ago next to a young Guatemalan woman who was being prosecuted by Andrew Thomas after a jail sweep from Joe Arpaio, and feeling angry about the way she was treated and the fact she had to take a plea that made her ineligible for immigration benefits because her children were out and her husband was in the chain gang in the same sweep. And she was being prosecuted under an unconstitutional statute and detained under an unconstitutional statute. And nobody could do anything about it because she had to take a plea to get to her children, which closed her chance of coming to the country legally. And her aspiration was to be a dishwasher and a house cleaner. That is the kind of commitment that I have had for 30 years. And that's the answer to that question.
Thank you, Mr. McWhirter. Mike, do you want to go with question number 2? And I'm going to let Julie lead off on this one. Mike?
Yeah, I'm here.
Question number 2, please.
Question number 2. This is for Mr. Knight specifically.
Okay.
And the question is, I agree with ending mass incarceration. So many people are in prison for misdemeanors. My question for Mr. Knight is, how will he do that? He continues to say comprehensive plans, but after going to his campaign page, I can't find anything but talking points.
Okay, I'm happy to share with you the ACLU questionnaire, the questionnaires we submitted to the Real Justice PAC, to the Justice Collaborative, and half a dozen others. And you know what, that probably does belong on my website. I have a public documents section, and I haven't uploaded those questionnaires yet. So thank you for pointing that out. To answer your question very specifically, we're going to reduce Maricopa County's contribution to the mass incarceration crisis by 50%. We're going to do that my first term. 20% of the people that we're sending to the Department of Corrections are going for simple drug possession. Like I mentioned earlier, that doesn't belong in our felony courts. I'm not just talking about diversion here. When we talk about diversion, you're talking about punishing addiction. People will fail, and you can't have a diversion program without teeth. So diversion means more people will get prosecuted, will go to jail, will ultimately end up going to prison. I'm talking about removing it from the felony courts entirely, which addresses 20% of the mass incarceration crisis. Another 15% comes from minor property offenses. Like I said, we literally send people to prison for shoplifting. That's going to stop. The other 15% from cultural reform, disclosing the cost of incarceration, and working hard to not allege unjust historical priors so that we reduce the length of sentences that are going there. That's 50%, 4 years, $400 million.
Julie Gunnigle.
And I didn't plant that one, by the way, Bob.
Okay. Okay. Judy,
yes.
Julie, please.
And this is an issue, and I hope you'll indulge me with a little bit of extra time, where I do see a big difference with this particular policy. And I can tell you that early on in this campaign, I spoke with advocates who believed in radical harm reduction, and were pushing for the same decriminalization of all drugs, all times, all places. And it's always my philosophy and leadership to listen first and to make decisions that are based on the best evidence. And I don't believe that pushing a policy of decriminalization of all drugs in Maricopa County is evidence-based. No other jurisdiction in the country, even those who've elected so-called progressive prosecutors like Larry Krasner and Eric Gonzalez, are pursuing total drug decriminalization like we just heard as a long-term solution for the war on drugs. Instead, they're pursuing the same sorts of solutions that I am: specialty courts, diversion, treatment, because they know that they work and that they break the cycle of addiction. I would note that those researchers who have backed this sort of radical decriminalization have also since walked back their own recommendations in light of the opioid epidemic. It turns out that our country has not done enough to stop big business behind opioid addiction. And if we are going to decriminalize the products without addressing their profit model, we're going to end up in a recipe for disaster. Last, I have an issue because total decriminalization isn't practical. My plan to end mass incarceration will save hundreds of millions of dollars a year. But in our system, our county attorney doesn't get to keep or spend this money. It reverts back to the county and back to the state. And the only thing that our state funds worse than public education is public health. So to say that the criminal justice system shouldn't be involved in providing treatment is to pass the buck to a system that doesn't exist and likely won't exist in this political environment. And those are just my three biggest objections. We don't have enough providers in Arizona for those who need help. We haven't seen any good evidence of how we're going to keep these drugs away from children. We haven't seen any plan to deal with incoming drug tourism. And last, if we don't address addiction head on, we're not going to be able to go at drug motivated crimes and addiction adjacent behavior like child neglect and abuse. So no, I don't support that particular plan. And I don't think it's a feasible solution for Maricopa County.
Okay, I'm Bob McWhirter. I'm going to come to you in a second. I'm going to ask real quickly though of Julie. We do have though prosecutorial discretion, right? You can choose whether or not to pursue certain offenses. You're not obligated by law to file a felony complaint in every possession of marijuana case, for example. Would you not, are you suggesting that you don't think the exercise of prosecutorial discretion is the right solution?
Oh, no, sir, not at all. I'm just drawing a distinction between our two platforms. You're right. Prosecutors are directly empowered by our statutes to prioritize crime. And I've said since day one that I'm not going to be prosecuting low-level marijuana offenses, but that all other drug possession offenses should be routed through treatment, through diversion, through specialty drug courts, through evidence-based systems, and not what we're hearing now that it's a different systems problem and that our criminal justice system should wash their hands of any other drug crime.
Okay, could you state though in a concise sentence or two what that distinction is between your campaign and Mr. Knight's campaign on this particular issue?
Absolutely. So Mr. Knight has called drug diversion programs coercive and has said that they're not the solution, that the answer is to not prosecute simple possession. And I just fundamentally disagree. I think that this office is uniquely empowered to provide treatment to those who want and need it, and that we should be providing every opportunity for people who are suffering with substance use disorder.
Okay, I'm going to go to Bob McWhirter now. I'm then going to go really briefly back to you, Will Knight, and then we'll go to closing remarks and take it out. So Bob, please, would you provide whatever response you have to what's been raised?
Well, I just like to say, I think Julie raises some excellent points. This office isn't like, you know, the one that can create the great society, to use the words of Lyndon Johnson. This really comes down to budgets. And with certain drugs, you need to get people into drug court as a step towards treatment. And sometimes the court route is the only way that it goes, and a prosecution route, or more appropriately, a deferred prosecution route, which I think is far more important than, for instance, a deferred sentencing route, is the best way to go with that. And the idea is to treat a social problem that becomes all of our social problems. And I think Julie's points are very well taken. I would point out, the devil is in the details. The devil's in the budget. I spent a year in El Salvador administering an $11.2 million USAID budget to reform the courts and the justice system, part of which had centers for victims and drug treatment programs. This is thorny stuff. It's hard stuff, but you have to have an eye to the budgetary mechanisms so that when you defer a prosecution or don't prosecute, how do those savings to the taxpayer somehow come back into your program to do the things you want to do with treatment and to really structure these things well. For that, you need to have true management experience, which I do. And I think these ideas are great, and I really like what Julie had to say about them, but it's the implementation of these things to really provide the good to people and to save the taxpayer ultimately. And I think that's what's got to be focused on.
Thank you, Mr. McWhirter. Appreciate it. Mr. Knight, I'll give you a brief opportunity to respond only because you were specifically referenced by both of the other candidates. And then we're going to move into closing remarks, beginning with Julie Gunnigle. So please take it away, Mr.
Thank you very much. And I want to be clear about some things. I did not hear anyone clearly articulate a difference between marijuana, not prosecuting that and exercising discretion there, and any other simple possession cases. What I did hear is some pearl clutching and people pointing at other things that I didn't talk about, child neglect, more serious offenses. So I want to be clear. It's the job of the county attorney when whatever the underlying cause is, if the criminal conduct is putting the public in danger, it's putting that individual and other individuals in danger, we respond to that completely, whether drugs are the impetus or not. We're talking about simple possession here. My colleagues answered this pretty clearly, the difference between us. And it seems like the difference between us is that I'm willing to not only consider other options, which, by the way, are widely accepted and approved of across the aisle by Republicans and Democrats who've studied this, physicians, psychologists, drug recovery experts. But if my colleagues spent as much time as I had laying the groundwork for what we're going to do with the $400 million per year that, yes, not all of that's in the county attorney's budget, but that's going to be coming back to our legislature and coming back to our county board of supervisors to exercise their discretion. They'd spent the time laying the groundwork that I have to prepare for substance use treatment, overdose prevention sites. If they had read the data, if they had read the reports, they would understand this as clearly as I do. We make our community safer by addressing the underlying causes, and we save lives doing that.
Going into closing remarks now, but before we do, I do want to compliment all three of you because, I mean, I got to say, I think that your comments were very enlightening. I don't really disagree with much of what anyone said. I think they were excellent. I really appreciate. I think we're going to hear about. I think that, quite frankly, I think this may be one of the most important opportunities in this campaign yet, where you've had an opportunity to really state what you believe. I think we've gotten into the heart of where you all three are coming from. Definitely some similarities, but I see some very clear distinctions as well. And I got to say, again, I need to compliment all three of you on your excellent contributions tonight. But we're going to move into closing remarks. This is the final opportunity for each candidate to state what they believe is most important to leave our viewers with. And we're going to do that by beginning with candidate Julie Gunnigle. Julie, please, would you would you provide us, please, with your closing remarks?
Sure. So, hello again. I'm Julie Gunnigle. You can find out a lot more about me at gunnigle2020.com. And I think that matters a whole lot because tonight's debate has very much been focused on drugs. And I think that's an important point. It represents almost the lion's share of cases that come through this office. And it has been a very long time since we have had intelligent drug policy, if ever, at the county level. But there's an awful lot to this position that we haven't covered tonight. It seems we talk about reform. It's so easy to talk about what we aren't going to do. It is just as important to talk about what we can do with this office, how this office for years has worn blinders to public corruption cases. How this office, when our unappointed county attorney came in, dismantled the only roundtable that we had to combat human trafficking. How this office has been at the helm of a sexual harassment scandal that we're just beginning to understand the magnitude of. And that this office has systematically denied our LGBTQ friends and family the ability to have a pro bono attorney attend to their adoption. There's so much more to this office than what we've discussed tonight. And I do hope that you'll join me at Gunnigle 2020, on Facebook at Gunnigle 2020, and on Twitter, because you've heard tonight what's at stake in this election. Now, make no mistake about it, we enter this election as one of the most important in our lifetimes. And at this place in history, it is stunning to think that the path to the presidency, the path to control of the US Senate, and the best time that we've had in 40 years to have a different party control our county attorney's office is at stake. There's also a lot at stake that we haven't talked to with respect to women's reproductive justice. When are we going to talk about that? Because our county attorney, our unelected county attorney, has said that she will prosecute people for their healthcare decisions were Roe v. Wade to fall. So this position is more important than ever, that we get someone in there who's willing to not just fight for the people, to fight corruption, to fight what's really at the heart of our incarceration crisis, but to make sure that that person shares our values. My campaign is always looking for volunteers. We are volunteer guided and run and led. And if you want to help, again, that is our website. The other opportunity that I want to share with you is over the next week, we're going to be extending the conversation. We're going to be talking to those who are directly impacted. We're going to be talking to those who've been helping the homeless. We've been talking to those who've been leading the charge to get a Veterans Justice Court in place. And we've been talking to educators. So please come continue the conversation about what criminal justice can and should look like in Maricopa County. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Julie Gunnigle, thank you very much. We're going to go now to Will Knight, and then we're going to finish with Bob McWhirter. Will, please, your final 3 minutes of closing remarks.
Thank you so much. And I would encourage anyone, if you would like to hold me to task, or if you just like what you heard, visit my website, knight2020.com. Follow us on social media at WillKnight2020, where we're going to be doing a post-debate interview live streamed again on our Facebook at WillKnight2020. Again, this time with Ramiro Russell, the president of the Arizona Asian American Association, and Letitia, who a brilliant reform advocate who fought for the women in Perryville during her year as Miss Maricopa County. I reiterate, there are 4 important key things that really set me apart. A lot of them got talked about tonight, and I stand by that record. When I talk about civil experience, and thank you for bringing that up in more detail because it's incredibly important, I want to be clear. Complex multi-million-dollar class actions, multi-jurisdiction litigation, trials in state and federal court, civil rights trials in state and federal court. I by no means am saying that reproductive rights litigation or other civil rights cases are not important. In fact, I was on the team that litigated marriage equality. I helped our clients achieve second parent adoptions. I am a massive advocate for reproductive liberty. What I am saying is, and by the way, my colleague is incorrect about this, the county attorney's office represents the sheriff's office in civil rights lawsuits. It's a fact. Those are his lawyers. To the extent Penzone has other lawyers, we're paying extra money out of pocket because there's a conflict or there's a lack of capacity. So it's incredibly important to have a competent civil attorney in that office. We don't know what it looks like, so we haven't had one in a long time, but we will in 2021. Second, again, I want to reiterate the most comprehensive decarceration plan. Look at our ACLU questionnaires. They are online on the ACLU page. They'll be on my website soon too. Look at them next to each other. See for yourself. Third, I have the greatest capacity to get out the vote as an immigrant, as a directly impacted voice in 1070 country, where we have more than 500,000 marginalized Black, Latinx, Indigenous voters who did not show up in 2016. That community that needs to be re-enfranchised. My message resonates there because that is my community. When we get those voters to the polls, when we motivate those impacted and marginalized communities to come out for real justice reform, That's going to have a huge impact, not just on this race, but on all of the important races, including our legislative races, who I'm going to need to partner with to accomplish a lot of these things that I'm talking about. Again, we've planned this, we've laid it out, we have a strategy. Last, I am the most qualified candidate, hands down. It was thrown around the entire time tonight, and that's not surprising given the context of the conversation. I know what the war on drugs did because it did it to me. I know the impact of losing relatives to prison because that happened to me. And I know acutely, time and again, and it's going to happen again and again, what it's like to be shamed and otherized and have barriers erected in front of you to prevent you from leading and helping your community. If you believe in second chances, in rehabilitation over retribution, then I am your candidate.
All right, Bob, thank you very much. Mr. Knight, Bob McWhirter coming out of the bullpen. Would you please provide us with your closing remarks? 3 minutes.
I remember about 12 years ago, again, during the Andrew Thomas time, I stood on the courthouse steps with Sean Aiken and Tom Ryan and Felicia Rodolini, and I stood and spoke in protest to what was going on under Andrew Thomas. And it wasn't just Andrew Thomas, it was the way that Andrew Thomas was in bed with Joe Arpaio, and they were never a check on each other. That's why those two offices are different. The county attorney is not the lawyer for the county sheriff. They're separate because the county attorney sometimes has to hold the county sheriff into account and vice versa. That's why that structure exists. That's why that was important. And that was the travesty that was going on there. And that's what I stood up and stood against. This race is very much about integrity and understanding how things work. I know that my lovely Hispanic wife has had to suffer difficulties because she's a woman and because she's Hispanic that I never had to do. I know that my Hispanic sons are facing a world of more difficulties than that. But I also know that when they're asked a direct question about their past, they answer it and don't call and blame somebody else for shaming them. They answer the question directly, and they've been raised well enough to know that they have to be honest and have integrity in whatever they've done, right or wrong, in order to move forward. They answer the questions. And in this race, it's not just one person that owes an answer to somebody else who asked a question. It's the voters who deserve to have the answers to the questions. It's not about denying anybody a second chance. It's not about shaming anybody. It's about telling the voters what we deserve. And really, why is this important? I have struggled in a system of injustice for 30 years. I have seen the ravages of this criminal justice system, and it has torn apart people's lives. And I think I'm a pretty good lawyer, and I know I work really hard, and very often it just doesn't matter because of the charging policies or the plea policies or mandatory minimums or Hannah priors, all of these mechanisms that are mechanisms of injustice that have taken away the power of judges to do what is right and given it to the hands of prosecutors who do what is political. That is the system that I have grown up in. And for the first time in these 40 years, we have a chance of having true criminal justice reform on all these issues, not only the issue of the legalization of marijuana, but all of these issues. And that's the most important thing and the thing to keep in mind. And to do that, you have to have the integrity to answer the questions, especially the questions about your own past, and not blame somebody else for marginalizing you or shaming you. Answer the questions, because if you don't answer the voters now, the Republicans will make sure you have to answer for it later, and that's what we don't want.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm going to give 10 seconds to Mr. Knight, just because, again, you challenged him just now. But first, I do want to say, again, how lucky we all are, and I'm sure that everybody out there can see that we have 3 candidates. I know that you're arguing with each other right now. You're competing right now to see who can become the nominee, who can win, who can become rather the next county attorney here in Arizona, in Maricopa County, the biggest county in the state of Arizona. That's a big deal. And you've got to fight for that and against each other right now. But I'm sure that any one of you would say that the other 2 would be far more preferred over what I'm going to still call the Bill Montgomery County Attorney's Office that we have today. despite that he's moved on for greener pastures, I guess. So I think that we are lucky to have 3 people like you who are challenging the person who currently occupies that office. I thank you for doing it. I know it's not easy. I know it's tough. This particular program, I think, has done a lot to really elucidate where you guys are coming from so that people can really identify with one of you or the other. And so thank you again. Now, I want to give 10 seconds, and really 10 seconds, Mr. Knight, because we're running
Sure.
over. And so please, if you want, to 10 seconds to respond directly to Mr. McWhirter.
I don't know if I need to. I just want to say thank you so much. You can't shame me. And I would encourage anybody who's listening right now, if I have answered his questions to you in the previous months, go ahead and throw it up in the chat right now. I'm on a mission to bring real justice reform because I believe in second chances. And you can believe that because that's everything that's led me to this point.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think now I am throwing it back over to Michael Weiser. Is that right, Michael?
That is right. How you doing, everybody? I want to thank everybody for sticking with us through this extended program. We have used up all the time that we have for this month's meeting. If you were looking to tonight's episode to get updates on legalization, legislation, what they're doing in Southern Arizona or what they're doing nationally with NORML, look at our website. There'll be articles coming up in the next couple of days to inform you on that. I want to thank our 3 candidates, Julie Gunnigle, Will Knight, and Bob McWhirter. I'd like to thank Representative Diego Rodriguez for coming in as a special guest, Tom Dean for for moderating the evening. Need to acknowledge the people that helped pull this off, Secretary Mike Robinette. The show was produced by our communications director, Ryan Wilson, with the help of Jenny Sadler from Plant Powered Remedies and Steve Smith from Greenfield Solutions. We also want to tip a hat to Dr. Aiden Huang, who helped with technical assistance. All the fine folks at Cannabis Radio, Safe Arizona. We have social media, you know, Arizona NORML, on Twitter, on Instagram. We have a website, and obviously you're watching this on Facebook, or many of you are. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, June 2nd at 7 p.m. right here online and hopefully in person. Do I have any other housekeeping remarks I need to make? Mr. Director Ryan Wilson.
Oh, you're good.
Then thank you, everybody, and we should switch off the video.
Thank you.